Hello everybody, it's Sarah, and today it is time for my, January wrap-up. So for the first wrap-up of 2024, and I have to say that so far, let me get into my stats, I've been kind of successful. Like, I have finished 8 books already in January. I also had 1 DNF. My reading wasn't the best, not gonna lie. Like, overall I have a lot of mixed thoughts on the books that I read, but yeah, so let's get into the wrap-up. But before, although actually let's not get into the wrap-up, before we do it, I am not gonna do TBRs for 2024 as I already mentioned in my goals video. However, I will use my wrap-ups to still pick a book from my series TBR chart to pick in the next month, or in the month in which I upload the wrap-up. So this pick is going to be for February. And then also because this year I do have a kind of read the world challenge. Well, not just this year, it's gonna be as long as it's gonna take me, to be honest, the challenge. But I want to read at least 1 book from a country where I haven't read a book from before each month. And so I will also pick that country in my wrap-ups. However, I decided to always do that like 1 month in advance, because with those books a lot of times it takes a while for them to get to me. Also, I have already picked a book and a country for February, so I have not yet created my country TBR chart, for which I will use, it's somewhere back there I think, the Illumicrate TBR chart that we got in the December box. I have not yet, as you can see it's still empty, put countries in there, so I will right now just use a random country generator just to see for which country I'll read a book in March. So let's click on the random country generator, and Italy, I did already read books from Italy. Like, I already ticked off all the countries where I read books before. So Algeria, did I read? I don't think I have read a book from Algeria before. I think it took me a while right now because I did read The Stranger by Albert Camus, which I think is set in Algeria. However, I have not yet read a book by an author from Algeria, so I will do that in March. I will look for a book. I won't tell you a book right now. And now let's quickly choose a series, because I've been rambling on for way too long already once again. And then we will get into my series TBR, and I will be continuing with the War Arts Saga by Wesley Chu. I have to read the 2nd book to be caught up, which I think is called The Art of Prophecy. Or was The Art of Prophecy the first one? I don't remember. I looked down back there because I know it's down there somewhere. But yeah, I will be continuing on with the War Art Saga in February. And now let's get into my books that I finished in January. I'm sorry, I was sick the last week, so my brain is still kind of like, you know, it still needs a bit to catch up again. Because obviously we cannot get into the books yet. We first need to get through my stats. Duh. So my stats for January were, as I said, I read 8 books and I had 1 DNF. My moods, I'm once again looking at my stats on Storygraph. My moods were mysterious, dark, sad, emotional, adventurous, light-hearted, funny, and challenging. The pace, 100% of the books were deemed as medium paced by Storygraph. Then in terms of page number, I had 1 book under 300 pages. Was it just 1 book? I think it was just 1 book. Then 63% were between 300 and 500 pages, and 25% were over 500 pages. I only read fiction in January, although I did continue on with, I did start 1 non-fiction book and I did continue on with another non-fiction book. The genres were fantasy, LGBTQIA, romance, historical, contemporary, nature, magical realism, religion, and literary. format. 88% of what I read were print and 12% were digital. And then in terms of star ratings, I had 1 2.25 star, 1 2.75 star, 1 3.5 star, 1 3.75 star, 1 4.25 star, 1 4.5 star, and 1 5 star. I don't remember if I said it was 2 3.5 stars. I think I said just 1. And then also additionally to that, I had my DNF, which I also rated because I made it over 50% into the book, which was a 1 star, but Storygraph doesn't let you rate DNFs. Also, I'll just quickly get something to plug in my lights because I'm kind of not liking the lighting right now. Okay, so I am back. Where was I? Yeah, Storygraph doesn't let you rate DNFs, but the one DNF I had, I did give 1 star, but I'll get to that in a moment. And then also in terms of, what's it called? In terms of representation stuff, I had, let's see for a second, 1, 2... Did I really just have 2 books by BIPOC authors? I felt like I had more. I was sure I had more. 2 books by BIPOC authors, apparently, only. Then I had 1, 2, 3 books with queer rep, which is not a lot for me for a month, to be honest, especially since I read 8 books. And then I do not think that I had books with, I mean, I guess, no, 1, 2 books with disability and mental health rep. I think, no, 3 books with disability and mental health rep. So yeah, that's it for my diversity stats. And now let's get into it and let's start with my DNF, which was, what was it called again? It was called, I think, The Last Immortal by Natalie Gibson, I believe is what the author is called, which was an arc. And I have to be honest, I do not like DNFing arcs. Because, you know, I want to give a book the full chance. Also in terms of, I still rated the book. Before I rate a book, I try to get at least 50% into the book. I do think that a DNF on its own is, in its own way, a sort of rating. But I think if you've read 50% of the book, especially if you had some very, very specific problems with the contents of the book, then I think it's absolutely okay to rate a book. Also, to each their own. I mean, I think it's still a bit weird if you read like 5 pages of a book and then you DNF it, not DNF it, then you rate it. But yeah, as I said, usually for me personally, my rule is 50% and then I'm allowed to rate the book. And with this one, so this follows Ramelia, I believe our main character was called. I believe it was also a first-person perspective. And you follow Ramelia, who is telling her own story. After she killed her parents, she is sent to an insane asylum. It's set in like Victorian England. And there she, first of all, is just treated terribly. But after a while, she kind of finds out that this person that she was engaged to as a child is now coming to get her, and it's kind of her telling the story, finding out how she's kind of a special person, or someone with special powers, how she found that out, and kind of her going onwards and telling her life. And this book was terrible. Like, this book, Ramelia goes through so much pain and suffering, but for absolutely no reason except to show how terrible her life is. It felt absolutely like trauma porn. There was no point to a lot of the stuff that she was going through. Also, the stuff that she was going through didn't really show in her character. Like, she didn't deal with the trauma that she was obviously going through. It also didn't appear as trauma to her. Like, she finds out multiple times that her body is used while she's not inhabiting her body to have sex or basically have orgies. However, her finding that out, she has like one violent outburst and that's it. There's no like lasting consequences on her psyche because of all the stuff that her body is going through, or that she finds out that she is going through or has gone through and stuff, and the memories that she slowly uncovers. There's also some stuff with D&D. I'm sorry, DID. I've been playing a lot of D&D recently, so sorry about that. There's some DID where I'm not sure if it falls into the realm of fantasy DID, if there were sensibility readers, if, you know, so I'm not gonna comment on the entire DID thing. All the female characters, all female friends of Vermilia basically die horrible and terrifying deaths. There's not a single female character that stays with her, so the female characters generally are just treated terribly by the narrative. I would not recommend you read this. It is terrible. I hated it, and I barely made it to 50%, and I purely made it to 50% out of spite because I wanted to rate this book 1 star. That's like it, and that's all I want to say about this book. Continuing on, we have my 2.25 star, which is The Serpent Bride by Sarah Douglas. Funnily enough, even though I rated this a really low star rating, I somewhat had a good time with it. Like, it's a really easy read, okay? It's a deceptively easy read, and on the page it's just, you know, this high fantasy, early 2000s high fantasy that I really enjoy, that's just not taking itself too serious, that's still very much into being a fantasy. And the setup of this story is that you have Ishbel, and Ishbel is the arch priestess of this cult that is called the Cult of the Serpent or the Cult of the Coil, one or the other, I don't remember exactly, that is worshipping the serpent god, and basically they read the future in the entrails of human sacrifices, which sounds bomb. And so this archpriestess, however, has to leave after the god tells her that she has to marry this king of this faraway country because there's a big evil rising, and basically her marrying this king is the only way to prevent this evil from rising, but you don't really know what's going on. And so it sounds like really interesting, and Ishbel sounds like this really badass character. Ishbel as a character kind of let me down, not gonna lie, because while she does show a lot of agency in the first few chapters of the book, she basically just then continues being handed around between different actors in this book. And she's kidnapped and then brought there and then has to do that. So she herself has absolutely no agency at all within the book, even though she is set up as the main character. And so that's the main thing why I gave it a really low rating. There were also some things, I didn't like the romance, I didn't understand the romance. I thought Ishbel had like way better chemistry with 2 other characters in the story. Actually 3 other characters. Fucked it, but no, she had to have a romance with the character that is actually disgusted by who she is and how she's like a member of the Coil and stuff. Aside from that, a lot of the other characters, like there was another female character that was just treated horribly and had to go through a lot of suffering and through rape simply to progress her character development or something along those lines. So not really a fan of that. Aside from that, yeah, there were some of the male characters that I did enjoy. I enjoyed, I think it was not Ismail, but something along those lines that I enjoyed. I didn't enjoy the main male character. Maximilian was kind of a very boring character, not gonna lie. So yeah, I'm still gonna continue on with this series though, because I don't know why. I just still had a kind of good time with it, even though objectively I have a lot of things to complain about in this book. But yeah, so we'll see when I'll get around to continuing it. The next book I have is my 2.75 star read, and let me tell you, I am not having a good time with my arcs this year. I read 3 arcs so far, or started 3 arcs so far this year. I DNF'd 2 of them, and the 3rd one was under 3 stars, which I do not often rate books under 3 stars, I have to be honest. But this next book is the reason why I'm not getting the February Illumicrate box, and it's To Cage a God by Elizabeth May, which is the first book in These Monstrous Gods. This is, I don't even know how to exactly describe this book, because not gonna lie, we're just not given a lot of information on why the plot is happening. But basically you have this very Russian Empire inspired world, and you follow 2 women who once were part of a rebellion, who find out that the emperor died and now they want to kill the empress as well, or defeat the empress as well. And so they start, like, one of them infiltrates the palace and the other one tries to find some magic power thing, elixir for something. And then there's also dragons or gods or whatever that are kind of caught within humans, and they give those humans magic powers. Like, and herein lies my main issue with the book. The book doesn't tell us why the empire is bad, aside from generally, obviously, empires being bad, but, you know. But it doesn't tell us exactly, okay, what is the tyranny of this empire? Why do we want to defeat them? The Empress is shown to be quite sadistical, but also not in a way where it's like, okay, how does this relate to the further population of the empire? Why do we want to defeat her, need to defeat her? I mean, yeah, one character wants revenge for her family, but, you know, how did it come to the situation why she now wants revenge for her family? Then there's also war threatening from another country, but we don't know exactly, like, how is all of this connected. And I don't have the biggest issue with, you know, there being holes in the world building or whatever. For example, one of my favorite books, The Study in Drowning, has something similar to it, where there's just a very vague relationship between 2 countries that's like constantly on the precipice of war. But that book just concentrated on something completely else. This tries to be political fantasy and it just completely fails at it. And I just didn't enjoy it whatsoever. Yeah. The only reason why I didn't give it any lower is because I did think that the relationships were built quite well. I did somewhat enjoy the relationships, but I'm not a romance-focused reader. Like, if you're usually a fantasy romance reader, maybe you will enjoy this book more than I did, but I just really didn't have fun with it. The next 2 books are my 3.5 stars. First, I have the book that I dragged with me from 2023, and that was The Battle Drum by Sara El Arifi. This is the sequel to The Final Strife, and it's the 2nd book in, I believe it's called the Ending Fire series. I always forget if that's what the series is called or not, but I'm just gonna say it is. This series is set in this also empire country, whatever, where people are differentiated into different castes depending on the color of their blood. The reds are the ones who are the highest. They're the ones who basically are allowed to live a normal life, whether that be as merchants or as the nobility and the leaders. Then you have the blue bloods, who are basically treated like shit and who have to do very hardworking jobs, often die on plantations and stuff. And then you have the clear bloods, or the ghosts, who are servants and who also are at their birth maimed. So their hands are cut off and also their tongues are cut out. And in this world, some years ago, a rebellion stole some of the babies of the Reds, of the leaders, because every few years or every 10 years, there's the Aktebar, I believe it's called. It's this big competition to see who's going to be the next leaders of the country. And the rebellion was like, if we steal those babies and if we make them loyal to us and to the Blue Bloods, and they then go and win the Aktebar the next time it comes around, then they can change the country for the better. And so we follow one of those babies now that the Aktebar has come around once again. However, she might not be in a position to actually join the Aktebar. And so this second installment, I enjoyed it about as much as the first book. I think my big issue with this story is that while I do think in general I find the plot interesting and I want to follow the plot, most of the main characters I'm just really not a fan of. And I kind of dislike them, and so I have a really hard time really connecting with the story and really getting into it. But yeah, so I'm still gonna finish the story. I really want to know how the story finishes actually also as well, because there were some big revelations had in this book, and yeah, we'll see how it continues on. My other 3.5 star sadly was a book that I was quite disappointed by, because I thought that this would be a 4.5 star at least, if not a 5 star, because on paper this book sounds perfect for me, and that was Starling House by Alex E. Harrow. I love Gothic literature, which this kind of goes in the direction of. In this one we follow, what's her name? Opal. And Opal lives in this little town where there's this very mysterious house, where there's every now and again there's new inhabitants in the house, and they always call themselves the Starlings. Opal also has a lot of troubles because her and her brother's mom died when she was still young. She's now taking care of her brother. However, they don't really have money, and she still wants to, you know, help her brother leave town. She doesn't really care about herself, but she wants to help her brother leave town. And so one day she gets drawn to Starling House. She just kind of weirdly gets drawn to Starling House, and she meets the current inhabitant, Arthur, of the house. And so she starts working there as a cleaning lady. And from there things kind of go on, and she learns more about the house and about the history of the town, etc. It's kind of hard. Like, first of all, I was disappointed by the writing. Not gonna be honest. I have heard a lot about Alex E. Harrow's writing and how it's gorgeous and beautiful and whatever. I didn't think it was like basic on the level of this is just a tool to tell the story basic. There was more to the writing, but it still felt kind of basic to me, not gonna lie. I also didn't really care about the characters that much, aside from Arthur maybe, and also Chespa. I cared more about the more mundane stuff in the story rather than the fantastical aspects that also once again just seemed a little bit basic to me. It just overall, it just didn't deliver on what I expected it to be. Maybe that's my own fault for expecting too much, maybe not, who knows, but yeah, I just ended up sadly just giving it 3.5 stars. Then next I have my 3.75 star book, and that was A Demon's Guide to Wooing a Witch by Sarah Hawley. This is the sequel companion novel to A Witch's Guide to Fake Dating a Demon, which I read in December last year. I borrowed both of the books from a work friend of mine, from a colleague of mine, and I had fun with this. This was a very, you know, very fun ride. This series basically follows different supernatural creatures and people within this town of Glimmer Falls. The first two follow two witches, and within the second book we follow Caladia, who is the best friend of the witch in the first book, and she comes across Astaroth, who is a demon, and that demon in fact was kind of, I don't think that's a spoiler, was kind of an antagonist in the first book. And she comes across him and he has amnesia. He in fact cannot remember shit, and another demon is after him and trying to kill him. And so the two of them kind of go on a little bit of a road trip trying to find Astaroth's memories again and trying to find out why this other demon is trying to kill him. And they, because this is fantasy romance, fall in love along the way. I enjoyed this more than the first book. I especially enjoyed the dynamic between Caladia and Astaroth a little bit more. The one big thing that I would say is a bit too much for me is these are quite insta-lovey. The entire book is set over like 3 days. And also the other thing is that this book is set like 3 hours after the other book. Like the beginning of this book is 3 hours after the end of the other book. So the fact that Caladia is like so open towards Astaroth, I mean, she's not exactly open, she's very, you know, antagonistic towards him, but still rather open, more open than she should be, in my opinion, is just a little bit, yeah. Needed a lot of suspension of disbelief on my part, but yeah, there's just, these are just fun because there's not too much world building that I can complain about not being there, or it's really just about the dynamic between the two with a little bit of, you know, tension in the direction of danger to spice things up. And then there's also always a little bit of a social justice or environmental aspect to it, which just makes the stories even more fun. So yeah, can definitely, if you enjoy fantasy romance, I think I can recommend them, probably. I always find it a little bit hard to recommend books in genres that I don't typically read. Moving on, we have my 4.5 star read, which actually was mostly a read, to be honest, because I finished Maiden, Mother, Crone by Joanne Harris. This is the bind-up of her 3 retellings of the Child's Ballads, which the retellings are A Pocketful of Crows, The Blue Salt Road, and Orphea, and then she also added a short story onto each of, well, a very, very short story onto each of the other stories. I had already read A Pocketful of Crows and Orphea previously, and I read The Blue Salt Road for the first time. I just really enjoyed Joanne Harris's writing. She's an amazing storyteller, very much modern fairy tales, so if you want like deep characterizations of the characters, you won't get that in those stories because they very much work with archetypes and with tropes, etc. Mostly in this regard, obviously the Maiden, Mother, Crone trope, although I have to be honest, I don't 100% see how the Blue Salt Road works into it. I mean, I kind of see it, but the funny thing is that the mother is a little bit the antagonist, more than the protagonist in that story. And Orphea is still my favorite, but I'm very happy that I now have finally read all of the Child Ballads retellings. And then lastly, my 5-star read was my Read Around the World book of January, which was Minor Detail by Adania Shibli, which is, or who is, a Palestinian author. This book was published in 2017, I believe, and it follows 2 narratives. The first narrative is the story of an Israeli soldier who ends up capturing a young Arab or Palestinian girl 1 year after the Nakba in 1949, and who ends up raping and killing her. And the other story is the story of a woman in, I always forget what it's called in English, but in the West, not the West Country, not Gaza, the other one. That, I'm sorry, I'm completely blanking right now. I know what it is in German, I just don't know what it is in English. From Ramallah, and she becomes fascinated with the story, which is this just very minor detail in history, and so she tries to find more about this girl and about what happened, and we follow her on this journey of this obsession. And this book is an absolutely heartbreaking and heart-wrenching book. It is so incredibly just... It is incredible, not gonna lie. It is one of the best written books that I have ever read, even though it is translated. The way language is used to just portray the inner landscape of those characters, or of the woman in particular, because the soldier we very much see from the outside, is crazy. The way the parallels between the two stories are spun, with the same pictures repeating themselves over and over. Especially there's like the barking of a dog always signals the same thing, and so well done, so hard-hitting. I think everyone should read this book, like, both for just, I don't want to say educational purposes, but you know, I don't know how else to put it right now, as well as just for how well it's written. It always seems kind of silly to me, to a certain extent, for books that deal with such hard-hitting content matters to talk about how amazing they are, because it just, I'm often lacking the right vocabulary to talk about those books, and to talk about those books in a way that feels like it represents what's inside of them. But yeah, this book was honestly amazing. Also, it's a really short book. And so yeah, that was it for this video today. If you have read any of the books that I mentioned, tell me in the comments down below what were your thoughts on them. If you enjoyed this video, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up, and also maybe subscribing. All the links to my social media, as well as to my book club of Queens, Witches and Valkyries, where I read one adult fantasy book written by a woman or genderqueer person per month, will be left linked down below, so go and check those out. We're reading The Chesed Heir by Sarah... no. I forgot what the author's name is. I think it's something with Sarah, but The Chesed... yeah, Sarah Hashem. That's what it was. This is what we're reading this month anyway. And yeah, with all of that said, I hope I'll see you soon. Bye!